Welcome to History and Sleep, the channel where we explore key moments in history, calmly, to help you relax and fall asleep. Tonight, we focus on the quiet moments of World War I through a story called The Whispered Patrol. This tale reveals the peaceful and surreal aspects of warfare during a very intense conflict. Before we start, please share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's great to connect with you through these shared stories from the past. If you enjoy these historical journeys, please relax your mind and get comfortable. We want to keep bringing you these stories. Without further ado, let's begin. The story begins on a chilly, fog-laden night in early 20th century France, along the western front of World War I, where the air hangs heavy with the anticipation of dawn. Private James, our narrator, lies in his bunk, his breath forming gentle clouds in the cold trench air. The sounds of the night are a stark contrast to the usual cacophony of war. Instead, there's the distant hoot of an owl, the soft rustle of leaves, and the faint murmur of soldiers whispering are in the distance. This setting is not just a backdrop, but a character in itself, embodying the eerie calm before the storm, the quiet that envelops the battlefield. After the day's violence has subsided, the fog acts like a blanket, muffling the sounds of war, creating an almost otherworldly peace. This tranquility is deceptive, as beneath it lies the ever-present tension of conflict. James, with his soft-spoken narration, invites the listener into this world where every sound is magnified, every whisper carries weight. The trench, dug into the earth, serves as both a shelter and a prison, where soldiers find moments of introspection amidst the chaos. The night watch is not just about vigilance, but about embracing the silence that the war has temporarily yielded. Here, in this timeless space, James begins to share a tale, passed down from his grandfather, one that speaks of a patrol where silence was their weapon, their shield, and their solace. The setting thus sets the stage for a story where the war's harsh realities are softened by the quietude of the night, offering listeners a unique perspective on how soldiers found peace in the midst of conflict. The concept of the Whispered Patrol introduces listeners to a unique facet of warfare. During World War I, where stealth and silence were paramount, James explains how his grandfather was part of a specialised unit trained not in the art of combat, but in the art of listening, observing, and moving undetected. These patrols were not about confronting the enemy, but about gathering intelligence through the subtlest means possible. In the silent, fog-shrouded no man's land, every whisper, every soft footstep could reveal more than any battle could. The patrol's mission was to slip through the lines, their presence almost ghostly, to listen to the murmurs of enemy plans, the clink of equipment, or the hushed tones of soldiers, sharing secrets they thought were safe from prying ears. This approach to reconnaissance was born out of necessity, in a war where every inch of ground was contested and conventional methods often led to immediate and deadly counterattacks. The Whispered Patrol was thus a testament to human ingenuity and the desire to survive, to understand the enemy not through might, but through silence. James narrates how his grandfather and his comrades would prepare for these missions, dressing in layers to minimise sound, using natural cover and communicating only in whispers or through hand signals, their breath barely a whisper in the cold air. This method of operation required immense patience, a deep understanding of human nature, and an acute awareness of one's surroundings. It was a psychological battle, as much as a physical one, where victory was measured not in territory gained, but in secrets uncovered. The story unfolds with a sense of suspense, but it's a suspense born from the anticipation of discovery rather than confrontation. Through this narrative, listeners are invited to imagine the tension of moving silently through a landscape fraught with danger, where the rustle of a leaf or the soft crunch of earth underfoot could spell disaster. Here, in this tale, The war is not about the roar of cannons, but the quiet that follows, the profound respect for silence that defines the Whispered Patrol's legacy. As James dives deeper into his narrative, the listeners are immersed in the eerie, almost mystical journey of the Whispered Patrol through no man's land, that infamous strip of earth between enemy lines where life and death are separated by mere moments. His voice, calm and measured, paints a vivid picture of this desolate yet hauntingly beautiful landscape, where the fog serves as both a cloak and a canvas for the silent theatre of war. This journey is not just about traversing physical space, but about navigating through layers of fear, anticipation, and the profound solitude that comes with such perilous endeavours. His grandfather's patrol moves with a kind of spectral silence, each man a shadow among shadows, their movements choreographed by the necessity of stealth. They tread carefully, avoiding the remnants of the day's violence, the twisted metal of barbed wire, the deep craters left by artillery, the occasional stark reminder of life's fragility. In the form of a fallen comrade or foe, the fog softens these harsh realities, turning the battlefield into a ghostly tableau, where the lines between past, present, and the spectral future blur. The narrative captures the sensory experience of this journey, the crunch of frozen mud underfoot, the damp, earthy smell that permeates the air, the cold that creeps through their layers of clothing. Each step is deliberate, each pause filled with the intent listening for signs of life or danger from the opposing side. James describes how his grandfather would sometimes stop, kneeling to the earth, ear pressed against the ground, trying to catch the vibrations of enemy movements, or perhaps the distant, muted sounds of a camp stirring. This part of the story is rich, with the tension of the unknown, where every rustle or whisper could signify the end, or a chance for survival. The patrol navigates by the stars, their only light sources, which twinkle indifferently above this silent war. The journey through no man's land becomes a metaphor for the soldier's own internal battles, the struggle to remain silent, to keep fear at bay, to maintain that thread of humanity in a place where death is an ever-looming presence. The emotional landscape is as challenging as the physical one. The men share a bond, forged in the silence, where words are unnecessary. An understanding is communicated through glances, through the shared weight of their mission. Here, in this no man's land, the war's brutality is momentarily eclipsed by the profound stillness, offering rare moments where one could almost forget the violence that awaits at dawn. Each man confronts his solitude, his fear, and yet there's a peculiar peace in this silence, a peace that comes from knowing they are part of something larger, something that transcends the immediate horrors of war. This patrol, this journey, is a testament to human resilience, to the ability to find beauty and quietude amidst chaos, to engage in a silent dance with death, where every step is a choice between survival and surrender. James continues his tale, his voice low and steady, recounting the night when his grandfather's whispered patrol came upon an unexpected presence in the fog-shrouded no man's land. He explains how, as they moved with the silence of the night, they suddenly became aware of another soldier, an enemy, not through sight, but through the faintest of sounds, a breath, the soft rustle of movement. The patrol stopped, and his grandfather, leading the way, stood still, listening intently. They could hear the enemy's presence, perhaps as startled by them as they were by him. In this tale, James shares how there was no immediate action, no drawing of weapons, just a profound moment of stillness, where both sides acknowledged each other's existence without aggression. His grandfather would later describe how they all stood there, in the thick, eerie silence, understanding that they were not just enemies, but soldiers, men with families, hopes, and fears, all caught in the same terrible dance of war. The story goes on to detail how, instead of engaging in combat, there was this silent agreement to pass each other by. His grandfather recounted how they exchanged a look, a slight nod, an unspoken truce in the midst of conflict. This moment, James narrates, was about the recognition of the other's humanity, a rare instance where the sounds of war were silenced by the quiet acknowledgement of shared human experience. He emphasizes that this patrol didn't return with tales of valor in battle, but with something more profound, the story of how silence and empathy could transcend the chaos of war. James invites his listeners to think about this as they drift to sleep, to ponder how in our own lives, moments of quiet understanding can be more powerful than any conflict. He suggests that as they lie there, preparing for sleep, they might reflect on how often we miss these opportunities for peace, how the quiet can speak volumes, and how a simple moment of acknowledgement can change perspectives. As listeners settle into their beds, James encourages them to imagine this scene, to feel the cold, damp air of that night, to hear the silence that wasn't empty, but full of potential for peace. He asks them to consider their own encounters, perhaps not with an enemy, but with someone different, someone they might not understand at first glance. How might their lives change if they approach these moments with the same silence and respect his grandfather's patrol did? This story, James concludes, isn't just about war, it's about the power of silence, of listening, and how these can lead to understanding in our daily lives, even as we seek the peace of sleep. James goes on to describe how his grandfather and his patrol made their way back after the silent encounter in no man's land. They moved with the same caution as before, but now there was a different weight to their steps, a quiet reflection on what had just transpired. He narrates how they navigated back through the fog, past the same barbed wire and craters, but this time, the journey felt different. There was an unspoken understanding among them, a shared experience that would bind them beyond the confines of their mission. As they approached their own lines, the sounds of their own camp began to seep into their awareness. The soft murmurs of men, the occasional clink of metal, the distant, comforting sound of a harmonica playing a melancholic tune. James describes how his grandfather would tell of the relief of returning to the familiar, yet the lingering thoughts of the encounter that remained with them, like a whisper in the wind. Back in the trench, they reported their findings, but the true story, the one about the silent pact with the enemy, was kept among themselves. A silent bond that they felt was too sacred to share with those who hadn't experienced the night's profound silence. James shares how his grandfather would often sit, looking out into the night, pondering over that moment where war paused for peace, where humanity was acknowledged in the darkness. He suggests to his listeners that, as they lay in their beds, perhaps in the quiet of their own night, they might think of this return. How often do we come back from our own patrols, from our daily encounters with the world, carrying stories or moments of understanding that we keep close, not because they are secrets, but because they are profound. James invites his audience to reflect on how these moments shape us, how they might change the way we see the world, even in the silence before sleep. He asks them to consider what they bring back from their day, what silent agreements they might have made with life's enemies or challenges, and how these shape their dreams. This part of the story is an invitation to introspection, to consider the journey back from our own battles, physical or metaphorical, and how the quiet, reflective moments can be as impactful as the loud, obvious ones as sleep approaches. James encourages his listeners to embrace these quiet returns, to let them inform their rest, their dreams, and perhaps their waking life. James concludes his story by speaking about the legacy that the whispered patrol left behind, not just for his grandfather, but for all who hear this tale. He explains how his grandfather would share this story, not as a tale of heroism, but as a lesson in the power of silence and understanding. The story, passed down through generations, became a reminder of how even in the darkest times, moments of quiet could lead to profound insights about humanity. He shares how this story influenced his grandfather's life long after the war, shaping his philosophy towards conflict, towards listening rather than speaking, towards understanding rather than judging. James reflects on how this legacy of silence taught his family the value of empathy, of taking the time to listen to the world around them, and how these lessons could apply to anyone's life. In the narrative, James invites his listeners to think about this legacy as they prepare for sleep. He asks them to consider how often in their own lives they rush to fill silence with noise, with words, with action, when perhaps the most profound connections or solutions come from simply listening, from allowing silence to speak. He suggests that as they drift off, they might carry this lesson into their dreams, into their subconscious, where the quiet can work its magic, healing, teaching, and connecting in ways that the day's noise cannot. James ends by encouraging his listeners to embrace the silence of the night, to let it be a teacher, a healer, a connector. He posits that just as his grandfather's patrol found peace in silence amidst war, we too can find our peace in the quiet moments of our lives, in the pauses between our actions, in the spaces where we allow ourselves to truly hear. He invites them to ponder on how this story might influence their approach to life, to conflict, to understanding others, and to find in their own silence a legacy of peace and empathy. As his voice fades, leaving the listeners to the sounds of their own breathing and the gentle ambience of the night, James wishes them good night, hoping that the tale of the whispered patrol lingers in their minds, offering a peaceful drift into sleep, wrapped in the comforting embrace of silence's profound lessons. Thank you for joining us here on History and Sleep. May this story calm you even more and drift you into a peaceful rest, sweet dreams and good night. On the quiet moments of World War I, through a story called The Whispered Patrol. This tale reveals the peaceful and surreal aspects of warfare during a very intense conflict. Before we start, please share in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's great to connect with you through these shared stories from the past. If you enjoy these historical journeys, please relax your mind and get comfortable. We want to keep bringing you these stories. Without further ado, let's begin. When France fell to Nazi Germany in June 1940, the world seemed to hold its breath. The swift defeat of one of Europe's greatest powers sent shockwaves across the globe. The German Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, had overwhelmed French defences with a speed and ferocity that few could have imagined. By the time the armistice was signed, the country lay divided, its northern regions under direct German occupation, and its southern territories governed by the puppet Vichy regime. For many, it was a moment of despair. For others, it marked the beginning of a quiet, determined defiance. The seeds of resistance were sown, even as German soldiers marched through the streets of Paris. Small, scattered groups of patriots, appalled by the collaborationist policies of the Vichy government, began organising in secret. These early resistors were a diverse group: students, farmers, factory workers, teachers, and veterans, united by a shared refusal to accept the occupation as final. At great personal risk, they began to circulate underground newspapers condemning the collaboration and calling for active opposition. One of the first voices of resistance came from outside France itself. General Charles de Gaulle, a relatively unknown military officer, broadcast an impassioned appeal from London on June 18, 1940. He urged the French people to continue the fight, declaring, "France has lost a battle, but France has not lost the war." Though his words initially reached only a handful of listeners, they planted the idea that resistance was not only possible, but necessary. In those early days, the French resistance was fragmented, consisting of isolated networks with limited coordination. Despite the lack of central leadership, they began to take action, sabotaging German supply lines, smuggling downed Allied pilots out of the country, and gathering intelligence on enemy movements. These acts, while small in scale, were fraught with danger. The Gestapo, Germany's secret police, operated with ruthless efficiency, and collaborationists within France were quick to report suspected resistors. Yet, for all the danger, the resistance grew. Every arrest and every act of betrayal seemed only to strengthen the resolve of those who remained. They adopted code names, learned to communicate through intricate systems of signals, and trusted few but their closest comrades. Resistance became a way of a life, a quiet, constant battle against an occupying force that sought to crush the spirit of a nation. As you consider the courage it must have taken for these individuals to resist, imagine their determination in the face of fear. Picture a moonlit countryside where shadows danced as couriers passed messages under the cover of night. Feel the resilience of a people who refused to let oppression define them. Let these thoughts soothe your mind as we prepare to explore the next chapter in their remarkable story. The evolution of resistance networks and the role of women. As the war progressed, the French resistance began to transform from loosely connected groups into a more coordinated and organised movement. The stakes were higher, the risks more severe, yet the determination of the resistors only deepened. This period saw the emergence of structured networks and specialised roles, as well as the crucial involvement of women, who defied societal norms to play pivotal roles in the fight against oppression. Initially, resistance activities were carried out by independent groups acting in isolation. However, the need for greater coordination became apparent as the war intensified. Networks like the Free French Forces, led by General de Gaulle, and the communist-affiliated Francs-Tireurs et Partisans began to emerge. These groups provided essential structure and resources, uniting disparate efforts under shared goals of sabotage, intelligence gathering, and the eventual liberation of France. The British Special Operations Executive, SOE, also played a significant role, training and equipping French resistors for covert missions. Within these networks, women found opportunities to contribute in ways that defied traditional gender roles. Women like Lucy Aubrac, who coordinated daring rescue missions, and Nancy Wake, known as the White Mouse, for her ability to evade capture, became legendary figures in the resistance. Others served as couriers, intelligence operatives, and saboteurs, often using societal underestimation of women to their advantage. They smuggled weapons and shopping baskets, carried messages sewn into their clothing, and gathered critical information under the guise of domestic errands. Despite their invaluable contributions, women faced unique challenges. They were often overlooked or undervalued by male counterparts, and their roles were frequently downplayed in official records. Yet their bravery and ingenuity were undeniable. Odette Sansom, one of the most famous female SOE agents, endured imprisonment and torture without betraying her comrades. Her story, like so many others, stands as a testament to the strength and resilience of the women who fought in the shadows. The evolution of the resistance networks brought about more sophisticated operations. Sabotage became a key strategy, with resistors targeting railways, bridges, and factories essential to the German war effort. In one notable operation, the resistance managed to derail a train, carrying German soldiers and supplies, delaying reinforcements, and boosting morale among the local population. These acts, while small in scale, compared to the massive battles being fought elsewhere, were critical to undermining the occupation and supporting the larger Allied war effort. As you imagine these acts of quiet defiance, think of the courage it took to carry out such missions under the constant threat of betrayal or discovery. Picture the secrecy of a hidden meeting place, the steady hands of a resistor assembling an explosive device, the determination etched on their faces and as they carried out their tasks. Let these images guide you into a place of calm, where bravery and resolve inspire a deep sense of reflection. The turning tide, the role of the resistance in Allied operations. As the tide of World War II began to shift in favour of the Allies, the French resistance played an increasingly significant role in the broader strategy to liberate France from German occupation. The resistors, once fragmented and acting in isolation, became vital partners in the planning and execution of Allied operations. Their efforts in the intelligence gathering, sabotage, and direct combat proved instrumental, highlighting their importance in the eventual success of the liberation. One of the most critical contributions of the French resistance during this time was their role in gathering and transmitting intelligence. With their intimate knowledge of the local terrain, the resistors provided detailed reports on German troop movements, supply routes, and fortifications. This intelligence was shared with the Allies through clandestine radio transmissions and courier networks, enabling precision strikes and coordinated attacks. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, the resistance played a crucial role in mapping German defences along the coast, information that would prove invaluable to the success of the invasion. Sabotage became another key element of resistance activity during this period. On the eve of the D-Day invasion, resistors carried out coordinated attacks on railways, communication lines, and supply depots, disrupting German logistics and delaying their ability to respond effectively to the Allied landings. Known as the Plan Vert, these sabotage efforts targeted key railway lines, preventing the movement of reinforcements to the front. The resistors risked everything to execute these missions, knowing that failure could mean torture and execution at the hands of the Gestapo. Perhaps one of the most dramatic examples of resistance collaboration with the Allies occurred during Operation Jedburgh. Teams of Allied operatives, often parachuted into occupied France, worked directly with resistance groups to organise sabotage missions and train local fighters. These operations fostered a deeper sense of unity and trust between the resistance and the Allied forces. One such mission involved the destruction of a key bridge in the Loire Valley, delaying German reinforcements and contributing to the success of the Normandy campaign. As the Allied forces advanced following D-Day, the resistance stepped up its efforts, engaging in direct combat with retreating German forces. The liberation of Paris in August 1944 marked a climactic moment for the resistance. Members of the French Forces of the Interior, FFI, a unified organisation of resistance groups, launched an uprising in the city, engaging in street battles with German troops and paving the way for the arrival of Allied forces. Their actions not only hastened the liberation, but also underscored the critical role of the resistance in reclaiming their homeland. Through their bravery and sacrifice, the French resistance helped to turn the tide of the war, proving that even in the darkest of times, ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges. Imagine the unity and determination it took to carry out these acts of defiance, the quiet courage of individuals who worked tirelessly, often anonymously, for the greater good. Let these thoughts guide you into a state of calm reflection, where the resilience of the human spirit inspires peace and serenity. Betrayal, sacrifice, and the cost of resistance. The story of the French resistance is one of courage and triumph, but it is also marked by profound betrayal and sacrifice. For every act of defiance that succeeded, there were those that ended in tragedy. For every victory, there were heavy losses. The resistance was a dangerous endeavour, and the constant threat of discovery and betrayal loomed large over its members. The Gestapo, Nazi Germany's feared secret police, was relentless in its efforts to dismantle the resistance. They infiltrated networks, used informants, and employed brutal interrogation techniques to extract information. The occupation forces offered rewards for information about resistors, creating a climate of suspicion and fear. Families, neighbours, and even close friends were sometimes coerced or tempted into betraying those they knew were involved. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of the resistance was the sacrifice of those who were captured. Many resistors were arrested, tortured, and executed without trial. The story of Jean Moulin, a prominent resistance leader, exemplifies the high cost of defiance. Moulin was betrayed by an informant, captured by the Gestapo, and tortured to death, yet he refused to reveal the names of his comrades. His bravery inspired others, but his loss was deeply felt throughout the movement. Despite the ever-present danger, the resistance continued to grow. Acts of betrayal, while devastating, often strengthened the resolve of those who remained. Networks adapted by increasing their secrecy, limiting contact between members, and employing elaborate codes and disguises. Still, the human toll was immense. Entire families were torn apart, villages were razed in retaliation for resistance activities, and countless lives were lost in the struggle for freedom. The resistors' sacrifices were not limited to physical danger. Many endured profound emotional and psychological burdens, living double lives and bearing the constant weight of secrecy. They risked not only their own lives, but also those of their loved ones. Imagine the strain of maintaining a facade of normalcy while working tirelessly in the shadows, knowing that one misstep could mean disaster. Yet, through it all, the resistors found strength in their shared purpose. They formed deep bonds with their comrades, united by a common goal and a belief in a better future. They found ways to celebrate small victories, to find joy and hope amidst the hardship. The sacrifices they made were immense, but they were not in vain. Their courage and resilience laid the groundwork for liberation and inspired countless others to join the cause. As you reflect on the sacrifices of these brave individuals, let their strength and determination inspire a sense of peace and gratitude. Picture the quiet moments of triumph, the relief of a successful mission, and the hope that sustained them through the darkest times. Let these thoughts guide you into a deeper state of relaxation as we prepare to explore the next chapter of their incredible story. Liberation and the legacy of the resistance. As the Allied forces began to liberate France, the efforts of the French resistance reached their zenith. Their years of covert operations, sabotage, and intelligence gathering culminated in a direct contribution to the Allied advance, proving that their sacrifices were not in vain. The liberation of France was not just a military victory, it was a triumph of unity, courage, and the indomitable spirit of a people who refused to surrender. The role of the resistance in the liberation effort was both strategic and symbolic. As Allied troops pushed inland from the beaches of Normandy, resistance groups rose up across the country, launching coordinated attacks on German forces and infrastructure. They cut communication lines, destroyed railways, and engaged in guerrilla warfare, creating chaos behind enemy lines and forcing the Germans to divert resources away from the front. One of the most significant moments came during the liberation of Paris in August 1944. The French Forces of the Interior, FFI, a coalition of resistance groups, launched an insurrection in the city. They erected barricades, seized key buildings, and engaged in fierce street battles with German troops. When the Allies arrived, they found a city already in the process of liberating itself, a testament to the determination and bravery of the resistance fighters. The liberation was not without its challenges. In the aftermath, France faced the difficult task of rebuilding, both physically and psychologically. The resistance movement, once united by a common enemy, had to navigate the complexities of post-war politics and the reintegration of its members into society. Many resistors struggled to return to normal life, haunted by the trauma of their experiences and the losses they had endured. Despite these challenges, the legacy of the resistance endured. Their efforts were instrumental in securing France's freedom, and their stories of courage and sacrifice inspired generations to come. Monuments and memorials across France honour their memory, ensuring that their contributions are never forgotten. The resistance also played a key role in shaping the post-war world, contributing to the formation of a more unified and democratic Europe. Reflecting on the legacy of the resistance, one cannot help but be moved by their unwavering commitment to their country and their fellow citizens. Imagine the joy and relief of liberation, the sense of pride and accomplishment that came with knowing their efforts had made a difference. Picture the celebrations in the streets, the embrace of loved ones reunited, and the quiet moments of reflection as they looked toward a brighter future. The story of the French Resistance is not just a tale of war, it is a story of humanity's resilience, courage, and capacity to unite in the face of overwhelming adversity. As we reflect on their journey, we are reminded of the extraordinary strength ordinary people can summon when they are driven by a sense of justice and a commitment to what is right. Their actions transcended the immediate need for liberation. They became a symbol of defiance and hope for the world. The sacrifices made by the resistance resonate deeply even today. They remind us of the importance of standing up for our beliefs, even when the odds seem insurmountable. These brave men and women understood that freedom was not guaranteed. It was something to be fought for, protected, and cherished. Their actions laid the foundation for a more united and peaceful Europe, inspiring movements for justice and equality worldwide. In the years following the war, the memory of the resistance became a source of national pride for France. Memorials and museums across the country honour their legacy, ensuring future generations understand the profound impact of their actions. Their stories are taught in schools, passed down through families, and remembered in annual commemorations. These acts of remembrance serve not only to honour the resistors, but also to remind us of the values they fought to uphold, reflect on the courage it took to risk everything for the sake of freedom, the quiet strength of those who carried out missions in the dead of night, the unity of communities that came together in defiance of tyranny. Let these thoughts remind you of the potential for greatness within all of us, the ability to rise above fear and uncertainty, to make a difference in the world. As you imagine the resistance fighters taking their first steps toward rebuilding their lives after the war, picture their hope for a brighter tomorrow. Imagine the peace they sought, the freedom they cherished, and the gratitude they felt for having played a role in history's turning tide. Let this gratitude fill your heart as you reflect on your own journey and the strength you carry within you. Thank you for spending this time with us on History and Sleep. May the story of the French Resistance inspire you to find peace, courage, and a deep sense of gratitude. Now, as the calming sounds of rain begin to play, let it guide you into a restful slumber. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the echoes carry you to a place of quiet strength and serenity. Sweet dreams. Have you ever wondered what truly led to this conflict? What sparked such profound divisions? And how did the people who lived through it endure the hardship and uncertainty? If you're curious, or simply looking for a peaceful story to accompany your evening, stay with me. Together we'll gently unravel the roots of the Civil War, reflect on its major events, and explore the enduring lessons it offers us today. Now let's ease into the story, take a deep breath, get cozy, and let's begin the tale of the American Civil War, a story of division, courage, and the hope for a better tomorrow. The American Civil War didn't happen overnight. It was the result of tensions that had been building for decades, tensions rooted in profound differences between the North and South. At the heart of it all was the issue of slavery. In the South, slavery wasn't just an institution, it was their economy. Cotton fields stretched as far as the eye could see, and the labour of enslaved people made the South incredibly wealthy. But it came at an unbearable cost. The humanity of millions denied, their voices silenced. In the North, things were changing. The Industrial Revolution was taking hold, and with it came growing calls to abolish slavery. People were starting to speak out more, questioning how a nation built on the idea of liberty could allow such a system to exist. This wasn't just a difference of opinion, It was a clash of values, one that only grew louder as time went on. Then there was the question of states' rights. Southern leaders believed they had the right to govern themselves without interference, especially when it came to slavery. They feared that the federal government, growing stronger by the year, would strip them of their autonomy. On the other side, many in the North believed that a united country required a strong central government, one that could uphold the principles of freedom and equality. The country tried to hold itself together through compromise. The Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, these were like bandages on a wound that just wouldn't heal. Each new agreement seemed to deepen the mistrust between the North and South. By the 1850s, things were nearing a breaking point. Laws like the Fugitive Slave Act demanded that even people in free states help capture runaway slaves, and that outraged abolitionists. Books like Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin brought the horrors of slavery to light, stirring emotions on both sides. Then came politics. The Republican Party was formed, with a platform that directly opposed the expansion of slavery. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president in 1860, it was the final straw for the South. His victory wasn't just a political loss, it felt like a direct threat to their way of life. Southern states began to secede from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America, and just like that, the country reached its breaking point. The differences that had been simmering for so long finally boiled over, leading to a conflict that would redefine what it meant to be an American. As you think about these divisions, take a deep breath. Picture the people living through this time, the fear, the hope, the uncertainty. Let the weight of their struggles soften as you relax, knowing that history is full of lessons about resilience, progress, and the power of moving forward. By the spring of 1861, the tensions that had been tearing the nation apart finally reached a boiling point. In Charleston, South Carolina, a small Union garrison stationed at Fort Sumter found itself surrounded by Confederate forces. The fort had become a symbol of defiance for the Union and a test of legitimacy for the Confederacy. Both sides knew that what happened there could set the tone for what was to come. After weeks of tense standoff, Confederate forces under the command of General P.G.T. Beauregard demanded that the Union troops surrender the fort. When Major Robert Anderson, the Union commander, refused, the Confederate forces opened fire on April 12, 1861. For 34 hours the cannons roared, lighting up the harbour with fiery streaks and deafening booms. The soldiers inside Fort Sumter endured the bombardment as best they could, but with no reinforcements and supplies dwindling, Major Anderson had no choice but to surrender. The fall of Fort Sumter was more than just the opening act of the Civil War. It was a spark that ignited the passions of both the North and South. News of the attack spread like wildfire, stirring anger and determination on both sides. In the North, President Abraham Lincoln issued a call for 75,000 volunteers to suppress the rebellion. The response was overwhelming, with men from towns and cities across the Union stepping forward, ready to fight for the preservation of the nation. In the South, the bombardment of Fort Sumter was seen as a declaration of independence. More states, including Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Arkansas, joined the Confederacy. The divide was now complete, the lines drawn between two very different visions of America. The early days of the war were marked by a sense of optimism on both sides. Many believed the conflict would be brief, with one decisive battle bringing it to an end. Young men marched off to war with confidence, their families cheering them on with flags and songs. But beneath the surface, the reality of what was to come was far graver than anyone could imagine. As you think about the beginnings of this war, allow your mind to soften its grip on the tension. Picture the soldiers standing on the shores of Charleston Harbour, their breaths visible in the cool dawn air, their thoughts uncertain but resolute. Imagine the cannon fire fading into silence, replaced by the gentle rhythm of waves lapping against the shore. Let this moment remind you that even in the face of division, hope and resolve can endure. As the war moved from the hopeful marches of its early days to the grim reality of prolonged conflict, the battles became larger, bloodier, and more devastating than anyone could have imagined. Names like Antietam, Gettysburg, and Vicksburg became etched into the collective memory of a nation forever changed by the horrors of war. In September 1862, the Battle of Antietam unfolded in Maryland. It was a single day of unimaginable carnage. Soldiers clashed in cornfields and along winding roads, with cannon fire and musket shots tearing through the air. By the end of the day, more than 22,000 men were dead, wounded, or missing. The ground was soaked with blood, and the scale of the losses left an indelible mark on those who survived. But out of this tragedy came a turning point. President Lincoln used the Union's strategic victory at Antietam to announce the Emancipation Proclamation, redefining the war as a fight not just to preserve the Union but to end slavery. Then came Gettysburg, the battle often seen as the turning point of the war. For 3 days in July 1863, Union and Confederate forces clashed in the rolling hills and fields of Pennsylvania. The stakes were enormous and the fighting relentless. On the third day, Confederate General Robert E. Lee ordered a bold assault known as Pickett's Charge. Thousands of Confederate soldiers marched across an open field under withering Union fire. The charge failed, leaving the Confederate army battered and retreating. Gettysburg marked the beginning of the end for the Confederacy, but the cost was staggering. More than 50,000 casualties in just 3 days. Further south, the Union Army achieved another critical victory at Vicksburg, Mississippi, securing control of the Mississippi River. The campaign was grueling, with soldiers enduring sweltering heat, constant skirmishes, and the hardships of siege warfare. When Vicksburg fell on July 4th, 1863, the Confederacy was effectively split in two, a devastating blow to their cause. These battles revealed the full weight of the Civil War, not just in numbers but in the profound human cost. Families mourned the loss of fathers, brothers and sons. Soldiers bore the scars of battle, both physical and emotional. The countryside was littered with the remnants of war, broken cannons, torn flags, and fields that once grew crops now filled with unmarked graves. As you reflect on these moments, let your thoughts rest lightly on the courage of those who lived through these battles. Picture the quiet after the storm, the fields growing still, the sun setting over the hills, and the long shadows stretching across the land. Let this image of stillness and resilience bring a sense of calm to your own thoughts, reminding you that even in the darkest times, there is always a path to healing. While the Civil War raged on the battlefields, the lives of those who remained at home were transformed in ways that were just as profound. Families were torn apart, communities reshaped, and everyday life became a constant balancing act between hope and hardship. In the North, industry boomed as factories shifted their focus to produce weapons, uniforms, and supplies for the Union Army. Women took on roles they had never imagined, working in factories, managing farms, and volunteering as nurses. Clara Barton, who would later found the American Red Cross, became a symbol of this era, tirelessly caring for wounded soldiers and earning the nickname the Angel of the Battlefield. But even as the war effort created new opportunities, it brought heartache, with families anxiously awaiting news from the front lines. In the South, the war brought devastation. Cities like Atlanta and Richmond were transformed into hubs of Confederate military activity, but as Union forces advanced, they left a trail of destruction in their wake. Fields that once grew cotton and tobacco now stood fallow or burned. With so many men away fighting, women and children were left to manage farms, often without the resources they needed. Food shortages became common, and Confederate currency quickly lost its value, plunging families into poverty. Both sides experienced the emotional toll of war. Letters became lifelines, offering glimpses of love, worry, and resilience. Soldiers wrote about the hardships they faced, while their families wrote back with words of encouragement and longing. These letters carried the weight of entire relationships, connecting lives separated by hundreds of miles. In addition to the physical and emotional struggles, the war also brought questions of identity and purpose. Enslaved people in the South began to seize opportunities for freedom as Union forces advanced. Some escaped to the North, while others joined the Union Army, fighting for their own liberation and the promise of a new life. The Emancipation Proclamation, announced in 1862, gave their efforts a powerful voice, transforming the war into a fight not just for unity but for justice. Amid all this upheaval, communities found moments of solace. Churches became places of gathering and prayer, offering comfort to those who had lost so much. Music, too, became a source of strength. Patriotic anthems, sorrowful ballads, and spirituals filled the air, reflecting the hopes and fears of a nation at war. As you reflect on the home front, allow yourself to feel the weight of these quiet acts of resilience. Picture a mother sewing by candlelight, her stitches steady even as her heart aches with worry, or a soldier reading a letter from home, finding strength in the words of love and hope. Let these moments of humanity remind you of the enduring power of connection, even in the face of immense challenge. By 1864, the Civil War had entered its fourth year. The hope for a quick resolution had long faded, replaced by the grim reality of a war that seemed to have no end. But momentum was beginning to shift. The Union, under new and determined leadership, launched a series of campaigns that would bring the war to a close, though not without immense sacrifice. General Ulysses S. Grant had risen to command the Union forces, bringing with him a relentless strategy of total war. Unlike his predecessors, Grant was willing to engage the Confederate armies directly, knowing that the Union's superior numbers and resources could eventually wear them down. His overland campaign in Virginia was brutal, with battles like the Wilderness and Cold Harbor leaving tens of thousands dead. Yet Grant pressed on, earning the nickname Unconditional Surrender for his unwavering resolve. In the Deep South, General William Tecumseh Sherman carried out his infamous March to the Sea, cutting a path of destruction from Atlanta to Savannah. Sherman's goal was to break the South's will to fight by targeting not just its armies, but its infrastructure and resources. Railroads were torn up, factories dismantled, and crops burned. The devastation was immense, but it succeeded in crippling the Confederacy's ability to sustain the war. As Union forces closed in, Confederate morale began to crumble. Desertions increased, supplies dwindled, and the reality of defeat loomed. In April 1865, General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, the backbone of the Confederate forces, found itself surrounded near the village of Appomattox Courthouse. With no hope of escape, Lee met with Grant to negotiate surrender. Their meeting on April 9th, 1865, marked the end of the war's major fighting. The terms Grant offered were generous, allowing Confederate soldiers to return home with their horses and personal belongings. His intention was to heal the nation rather than humiliate its defeated half. It was a moment of quiet dignity, the beginning of a long and difficult process of reconciliation. Yet, even as the war ended, its cost was staggering. More than 600,000 lives had been lost, and much of the South lay in ruins. President Abraham Lincoln, who had guided the Union through its darkest hours, would not live to see the fruits of his efforts. Just days after Lee's surrender, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer, plunging the nation into mourning. The war had answered two critical questions. The Union would endure and slavery would not, but it left behind deep scars, both physical and emotional, that would take generations to heal. The Reconstruction era that followed was fraught with challenges, as the nation struggled to rebuild and redefine itself. As you reflect on the end of this monumental conflict, let the weight of its lessons rest gently in your thoughts. Imagine the quiet after the surrender, the weary soldiers returning home, the fields gradually returning to life, and the first rays of hope shining through the darkness. Let these images remind you of the strength it takes to rebuild and the enduring resilience of the human spirit. When the guns fell silent and the soldiers returned home, the United States was a changed nation. The Civil War had been a crucible, testing the very foundation of the country and reshaping its identity forever. Though the fighting was over, the legacy of this monumental conflict continued to echo through the generations, shaping the path forward for a fractured but hopeful nation. One of the most profound outcomes of the war was the abolition of slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation had begun this process, but it was the 13th Amendment, ratified in December 1865, that formally ended the institution that had defined so much of the nation's conflict. Millions of formerly enslaved people began new lives, but the road ahead was steep. The promises of freedom were met with resistance, and the Reconstruction era revealed just how deep the division still ran. The war also redefined the relationship between the states and the federal government. No longer would the question of secession hang over the Union. The victory of the North solidified the idea that the United States was not just a collection of states, but a single, indivisible nation. It was a hard-fought truth, one that cost countless lives but ultimately preserved the Union. Yet the scars of war were everywhere. The South faced immense physical and economic devastation. Cities had been reduced to rubble, and entire communities were struggling to rebuild. The loss of so many men left families broken and towns forever changed. Even in the North, where victory was celebrated, the weight of the sacrifices made was impossible to ignore. For the soldiers who fought, the war left an indelible mark. Some returned home to rebuild their lives, carrying memories of camaraderie and courage. Others bore wounds, both seen and unseen, that would shape the rest of their days. Memorials began to rise in towns across the country, honouring the fallen and reminding future generations of the cost of conflict. The Civil War also left a legacy of storytelling. Veterans shared their experiences, songs from the era became part of the cultural fabric, and writers like Walt Whitman and Ambrose Bierce captured the emotional depth of the war in poetry and prose. These stories served not only to remember, but to help a nation heal, to bridge the gaps between North and South, and to offer lessons for the future. As you reflect on the legacy of the Civil War, let the enormity of its lessons settle softly in your thoughts. Imagine the strength of a people rebuilding from such a devastating chapter, the resilience to start anew, the courage to face an uncertain future, and the hope that guided them toward a brighter horizon. Let these reflections fill you with a quiet sense of gratitude and peace. The Cuban Missile Crisis didn't arise in a vacuum. It was the culmination of years of Cold War tensions, a time when the world seemed to teeter on the edge of uncertainty. Imagine, for a moment, the quiet hum of the post-war era giving way to the slow, steady march of ideological rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. This rivalry, like a deep and resonant drumbeat, echoed across the globe, shaping the landscapes of diplomacy and conflict alike. The United States, with its vision of democracy, and the Soviet Union, determined to spread communism, found themselves locked in a careful and delicate dance, their every move calculated, every gesture weighted with significance. By the early 1960s, this struggle had already seen pivotal moments, like the Berlin blockade and the Korean War, leaving an enduring imprint on the hearts and minds of millions. Then came 1959, a turning point that brought Cuba into sharp focus. The Cuban Revolution swept through the island like a soft but unrelenting wind, carrying Fidel Castro to power and replacing the Batista regime. Under Castro, Cuba aligned itself with the Soviet Union, transforming into a communist stronghold just 90 miles from American shores, a distance so short it might as well have been a whisper across the ocean. This proximity brought with it a quiet but undeniable unease, a tension that settled in the minds of US leaders like a lingering shadow. The hum of covert operations soon followed, culminating in the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. This misstep, like a ripple in still water, spread embarrassment for the Kennedy administration and deepened the chasm of mistrust between the US and Cuba. At the same time, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, ever watchful and calculating, saw an opportunity to exploit this growing divide. He began to weave a plan that would take full advantage of Cuba's location, creating a web of uncertainty and anticipation that seemed to stretch endlessly across the calm skies. As we linger in this moment of reflection, picture a world on edge yet still wrapped in quiet resolve. Let these images and thoughts drift gently through your mind, like leaves carried by a slow, steady current. The stage was set, each thread of tension delicately placed, weaving the intricate fabric of what would soon become one of the most dramatic and perilous moments in modern history. In the quiet skies of October 14th, 1962, something extraordinary unfolded, something that would ripple through time like a soft, endless wave. High above the peaceful landscapes of Cuba, an American U-2 reconnaissance plane glided effortlessly, its sleek form cutting through the stillness of the heavens. From its vantage point, the plane captured a series of photographs, silent yet profound, revealing a truth that would shake the world. Soviet missile sites, nestled discreetly amidst the lush and tranquil countryside, were under construction. These were no ordinary missiles. Their presence was like a whisper of something immense and dangerous, carrying with them the potential for devastation. Capable of reaching the heart of the United States within mere moments, these medium and intermediate range ballistic missiles carried the weight of a silent, looming threat. The images, delicate and unassuming, were swiftly brought back to Washington, where they were met with a storm of hushed urgency and careful deliberation. Picture the scene as President John F. Kennedy and his advisors gathered in the stillness of the White House. The room was heavy with the quiet murmur of voices, each one low and deliberate as the photographs were laid out like puzzle pieces on a smooth, polished table. The gravity of the discovery hung in the air, a presence as tangible as the tick of a distant clock. Each second stretched slow and steady, like the rhythm of a deep and calming breath. As the advisors spoke, their words mingled with the ambient quiet, and the room seemed to hold its breath. It became clear that this was not just a military challenge, but a profound shift in the balance of power. The missiles in Cuba mirrored the US's own installations in Turkey, creating a precarious symmetry of threat that deepened the unease. This delicate balance, like a tightrope suspended above a chasm, demanded extraordinary care and calm. For a moment, close your eyes and imagine the scene. The soft rustle of papers, the distant hum of voices, and the unspoken tension that lingers in the air like a gentle mist. This was a time of reflection, a time when the world seemed poised on the edge of a decision that could change everything. Yet, amidst the tension, there was also a stillness, a fragile sense of order holding back the chaos beyond. As the president and his team weighed their options, the choices before them seemed infinite, like waves rolling gently onto a shore. Diplomacy, military action, or something in between, each decision carried the weight of an uncertain future. But for now, in this moment, let these thoughts settle, like leaves falling softly to the ground, as the story gently unfolds further into the night. In the days that followed the discover, the world seemed to move in slow motion, each moment drawn out as though the air itself had grown thicker, heavier. President Kennedy and his advisors, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council, often referred to as ExComm, met repeatedly in the quiet, reflective halls of the White House. Their discussions, careful and deliberate, centered on one pressing question: how to respond to this grave discovery. The choices before them were as weighty as the stillness that filled the room. One option was a military strike to destroy the missile sites, swift and decisive. Another was a full-scale invasion of Cuba, an action that would surely provoke a direct confrontation with the Soviet Union. But even as these strategies were considered, their risks loomed large, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. A misstep could spark the very thing they all feared, a nuclear war that might engulf the world in unimaginable devastation. Amid the tense deliberations, a third option emerged, one that seemed to offer a chance for resolution without immediate violence: a naval quarantine of Cuba. This option, though less aggressive, was no less bold. By establishing a blockade to prevent further delivery of Soviet missiles and military equipment to the island, the United States could demonstrate its resolve while leaving room for diplomacy to take hold. The term quarantine was chosen carefully, softer than blockade, to avoid the suggestion of an act of war. Picture, if you will, the long pauses between words as the advisors weighed this plan. Their voices, low and measured, filled the space like the gentle lapping of waves against a shore. The room, dimly lit and hushed, seemed to hold its breath as the implications of the quarantine began to crystallize. Would it be enough to deter the Soviets, or would it provoke them into escalating the conflict further? The question lingered, unanswered, like a faint echo in the stillness. On October 22nd, 1962, President Kennedy addressed the nation in a speech that broke the quiet tension of those days. His calm and steady voice carried across the airwaves, explaining the situation and announcing the quarantine. He described the missiles in Cuba as a secret, swift and extraordinary build-up, and made it clear that the United States would not tolerate this threat so close to its shores. Yet, even in this moment of firm resolve, there was an undercurrent of hope, a hope that reason might prevail, that diplomacy might yet find a path through the shadows of uncertainty. Imagine the millions of listeners across the world, leaning closer to their radios, their breaths slowing as the words sank in. The quarantine was now in place, a quiet but firm line drawn in the waters around Cuba. The decision was made, yet the outcome remained unknown, hanging in the air like a gentle mist at dawn. As we move forward, let these thoughts rest gently in your mind, like whispers carried on a cool, soothing breeze as we drift deeper into this unfolding story. Take a moment, breathe deeply, slowly, and imagine the calm before a storm, the kind of quiet that hums with anticipation when time seems to stretch and every second feels longer than the last. This was the atmosphere as the United States naval quarantine of Cuba went into effect on October 24, 1962. The blockade was not just a line drawn in the water, it was a test of wills between two superpowers. American warships moved into position, forming a silent, steady wall in the ocean, ready to intercept any Soviet vessels attempting to deliver more missiles or military supplies to Cuba. These ships, though distant from the shorelines, carried with them the weight of a global audience's gaze as the world watched and waited, holding its collective breath. Far away in the stillness of the Kremlin, Premier Khrushchev faced his own moment of reflection. Soviet ships were already en route to Cuba, some carrying cargo that would challenge the blockade directly. Would they stop or press on? To retreat might signal weakness, to advance might spark open conflict. The tension was palpable, an invisible thread pulling tighter with each passing hour. Imagine the seas, vast and unyielding, their surface calm but concealing a profound sense of unease beneath. The American ships floated silently, their crews ready but motionless, listening to the soft rhythm of the waves and the low hum of the engines. Across the Atlantic, the Soviet vessels continued their approach, the space between them shrinking slowly, steadily, like the narrowing of a great and ominous gulf. Back in Washington, the ExComm held near-constant meetings, their discussions now carrying the gravity of the quarantine's first test. Reports from the blockade zone came in, each one met with careful deliberation. The tension in those rooms was thick, almost tangible, as though it might spill out into the world beyond. Every voice was measured, every pause significant, as the weight of their decisions pressed down like a blanket of still and heavy air. Then, on October the 25th, an eerie moment of calm arrived. The Soviet ships stopped just short of the blockade line. This pause, this single moment of restraint, was both a relief and a reminder of how precariously balanced the situation remained. Khrushchev sent a message proposing negotiations, a glimmer of light breaking through the clouds of uncertainty. For a moment, let your mind linger on this fragile quiet. Imagine the stillness of the ocean, the distant shapes of the ships, and the muffled sounds of calm activity on deck. It was a pause, but not yet a resolution, like the faintest hint of dawn before the sun begins to rise. As the world held its breath, the next moves remained uncertain, waiting to unfold with the slow and deliberate pace of history itself. Pause for a moment. Let the tension of the previous days fade, and allow yourself to sink into this pivotal chapter, a time when words, not weapons, became the instruments of a potential resolution. As the blockade held firm and Soviet ships paused in their advance, the crisis shifted from the oceans to the realm of communication. It was now a battle of letters and messages, where every word carried the weight of the world. On October 26th, Premier Khrushchev sent the first of 2 letters to President Kennedy. It was a message of emotion and urgency, filled with words that seemed almost pleading. Like whispers carried on a breeze, Khrushchev proposed a resolution. The Soviet Union would withdraw its missiles from Cuba if the United States would promise not to invade the island. The tone was personal, almost vulnerable, as if Khrushchev sought to reach Kennedy not as an adversary, but as a fellow human standing on the precipice of disaster. The next day, however, brought a second letter, different in tone, harsher, more calculated. This one demanded that the United States also remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, an escalation that added a new layer of complexity to the already delicate negotiations. These letters, arriving like waves in succession, left Kennedy and his advisers navigating treacherous waters. Which message represented Khrushchev's true intent? Was this a sincere offer or a ploy to gain an upper hand? In the stillness of the White House, Kennedy and the ex-com deliberated late into the night. Their discussions were careful, deliberate, each word spoken slowly, as if to avoid disturbing the fragile balance they were trying to maintain. The question lingered in the air like the soft echo of distant footsteps. How could they accept the first offer without appearing weak, while also avoiding a direct confrontation that might spiral into war? Imagine the quiet of those rooms, filled only with the faint rustling of papers and the low hum of thought. It was a moment of immense pressure, but also one of profound restraint, as though the weight of their decisions was held aloft by a delicate and invisible thread. Finally, Kennedy made his choice. He responded to Khrushchev's first letter, agreeing to the proposal of a non-invasion pledge in exchange for the removal of the missiles from Cuba. The Jupiter missiles in Turkey were not mentioned in this reply, a deliberate omission meant to simplify the path to resolution. At the same time, Robert Kennedy, the president's brother and attorney general, quietly met with Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin to discuss the removal of the Turkish missiles as a separate, unofficial arrangement. As the letters were exchanged, the world waited in silence. Imagine millions of hearts beating slowly, steadily, as the fate of humanity seemed to hang in the balance. This was diplomacy at its most fragile, like a fine thread spun across an open void. And yet, in that fragility, there was also hope, a faint but growing light at the end of a long and shadowed tunnel. Let this, though, drift gently through your mind as we move toward the final chapter of this remarkable story, where the crisis finds its resolution and the world begins to exhale. As the sun rose on October 28, 1962, the world awoke to a glimmer of relief. Premier Khrushchev announced that the Soviet Union would dismantle and remove its missiles from Cuba. His decision, conveyed in a public radio broadcast, marked the end of the 13-day standoff that had brought humanity to the brink of nuclear war. The missiles, he declared, would be taken apart and the weaponry returned to the Soviet Union under United Nations supervision. For President Kennedy, this was a moment of cautious triumph. The US quarantine had succeeded in forcing a peaceful resolution without resorting to violence. The secret agreement to remove the American Jupiter missiles from Turkey added a layer of complexity but remained undisclosed to the public, allowing both nations to save face in the eyes of the world. In the following days, work began to de-escalate the situation. Soviet personnel in Cuba started dismantling the missile sites, and American reconnaissance planes confirmed the progress. Meanwhile, the US ships maintained their positions until the removal was complete, standing as quiet sentinels of the fragile peace that now settled over the Caribbean. The resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis was hailed as a victory for diplomacy, but it left an enduring impact on both nations. In the United States, Kennedy emerged as a skilled leader who had successfully navigated the most dangerous crisis of the Cold War. For Khrushchev, the crisis was a humbling moment that exposed the limits of Soviet power and, in part, contributed to his eventual removal from office. Yet, the aftermath also brought reflection. The sheer proximity to disaster prompted both superpowers to reconsider their approach to conflict and diplomacy. In 1963, the two nations established the Moscow-Washington Hotline, a direct communication link designed to prevent misunderstandings and delays in future crises. It was a small but significant step toward reducing the risk of nuclear confrontation. Imagine the stillness of those post-crisis days. The world, so recently shadowed by the threat of annihilation, now seemed quieter, calmer, as if holding its breath in gratitude. The Cuban Missile Crisis had shown how close humanity could come to its own destruction, and how essential it was to step back from the edge. In the years that followed, the crisis became a symbol of both the dangers of the nuclear age and the power of restraint and diplomacy. It remains a reminder of the delicate balance that sustains peace and the courage required to preserve it. As we reflect on the Cuban Missile Crisis, we realize its profound significance in shaping the trajectory of history. These 13 days in October 1962 were more than just a tense standoff between two superpowers. They were a moment when humanity stood on the edge of a precipice, where the future of the world hung in the balance. The resolution of the crisis, through diplomacy, restraint, and the courage to seek peace, reminds us of the fragile nature of our existence and the deep responsibility we all share to preserve it. The Cuban Missile Crisis serves as a testament to the power of careful communication and the importance of maintaining calm in the face of peril. It is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, when fear and uncertainty seem overwhelming, it is possible to find a path toward peace through understanding and cooperation. The decisions made during that crisis, by leaders and diplomats alike, were not just about averting disaster, but about fostering a future in which humanity could move forward, together, with a deeper commitment to avoiding the devastation of war. This story, with all its tension and drama, carries with it a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing that through diplomacy, cooler heads prevailed. The crisis could have led to a catastrophe, but instead, it ended with the restoration of a delicate peace, and as we find comfort in that resolution, we can allow ourselves to drift into a space of tranquility, knowing that even in the most tumultuous times, peace is always within our reach if we dare to reach for it. As we close this chapter on the Cuban Missile Crisis, take a moment to feel the weight of history's lessons wash over you, soothing your mind and heart. The story, though intense, carries with it a sense of relief and calm, a reminder that peace, like the most gentle rain, can cleanse even the deepest tensions. Now, as we begin to let go of these thoughts, allow the soft sound of rain in the background to fill your senses. Let the music gently carry you, like a breeze through the trees, into a state of deep relaxation. The calm, steady rhythm of the rain, with its soothing patter and the quiet hum of the early 17th century, a time when Europe was a patchwork of kingdoms, principalities, and religious divides. At the heart of this patchwork lay the Holy Roman Empire, a vast and fragmented realm that stretched across much of Central Europe. For centuries, tensions simmered beneath the surface, as Catholic and Protestant states vied for power, influence, and the right to practice their faith freely. The spark that ignited this long and devastating conflict came in the form of a defiant act in the city of Prague. In 1618, Protestant nobles in Bohemia, angered by perceived restrictions on their religious freedoms under Emperor Ferdinand II, staged a dramatic rebellion. They stormed Prague Castle, seized 2 imperial officials, and hurled them out of a window in an event known as the Defenestration of Prague. Miraculously, the officials survived the fall, but the act was a clear declaration of defiance. This single moment set off a chain reaction, like ripples spreading across a still pond. Ferdinand II, a staunch Catholic, saw the rebellion as a direct challenge to his authority in the Catholic Church. Determined to restore order and Catholic dominance, he mobilized his forces, while Protestant leaders across the empire began rallying their allies in preparation for a larger struggle. What began as a localized conflict in Bohemia quickly escalated into a broader war. Drawing in neighboring regions and foreign powers, Protestant princes sought support from allies in Denmark, Sweden, and beyond, while Catholic states turned to Spain and the powerful Habsburg dynasty for aid. The war was no longer just about Bohemia. It had become a contest of religion, politics, and territorial ambition. As the conflict unfolded, it became clear that this was not a war of quick resolutions. The early battles were fierce yet inconclusive, leaving both sides entrenched in their positions and more determined than ever to secure victory. The countryside began to bear the scars of the war. Villages burned, crops were destroyed, and innocent lives were caught in the crossfire. The 30 Years' War was born out of these divisions, and its origins reveal much about the fragile balance of power and belief in Europe at the time. It was a conflict rooted in faith, but also fueled by ambition and fear, a perfect storm that would rage for decades. Take a moment to absorb this beginning, the first ripples of what would become a vast and relentless storm. As we move forward, the intricate web of alliances, battles, and betrayals will unfold. But for now, let the gravity of this moment settle, a reminder of how one act of defiance can echo across history. As the conflict in Bohemia ignited, the deeper fault lines of Europe's religious divide began to widen, casting a shadow over the entire continent. At its core, the 30 Years' War was fueled by the tensions between Catholics and Protestants, a struggle that had simmered since the Reformation in the 16th century. The Peace of Augsburg in 1555 had attempted to create harmony by allowing rulers within the Holy Roman Empire to determine their state's religion, whether Catholic or Lutheran. Yet this fragile peace left many unresolved issues, particularly with the rise of Calvinism, a branch of Protestantism that had not been recognised in the agreement. As Calvinist states gained influence, the Catholic Habsburg rulers viewed them as a threat. Their growing presence felt like a challenge to the established order. When Ferdinand II ascended to the throne of the Holy Roman Empire, he was determined to restore Catholic dominance. His unwavering faith and aggressive policies further inflamed tensions, especially among Protestant states that viewed him as a tyrant bent on crushing their freedoms. Ferdinand's allies in Spain and the papacy provided him with support, reinforcing the Catholic position with resources and manpower. On the other side, the Protestant Union, a coalition of Protestant princes, mobilised to resist Ferdinand's ambitions. They sought aid from Protestant powers beyond the empire, including Denmark, Sweden and England. These nations saw the conflict not only as a religious struggle, but also as an opportunity to weaken the Habsburgs and expand their own influence. The war spread beyond Bohemia, spilling into regions such as the Palatinate, Saxony and Bavaria. Each new front brought devastation to towns and villages, as armies marched across the countryside, leaving destruction in their wake. The brutality of the conflict became evident in battles such as the Battle of White Mountain in 1620, a crushing defeat for the Protestants that marked the beginning of Ferdinand's efforts to reassert Catholic control. But despite Catholic victories in the early years, the war refused to subside. Protestant leaders rallied, drawing on the resources and military expertise of their allies. Sweden, under King Gustavus Adolphus, emerged as a formidable force. His disciplined armies breathed new life into the Protestant cause. The balance of power began to shift and the war escalated further. This was no longer a simple struggle between Catholics and Protestants. It became a war of ambition and survival. Smaller states and mercenary armies joined the fray, drawn by promises of plunder and pay. The war became a theatre of chaos, where alliances shifted and even traditional enemies found themselves fighting side by side in pursuit of their goals. As the conflict deepened, it transformed the very nature of warfare. The 30 Years' War was one of the first conflicts where civilian populations suffered as much as, if not more than, the soldiers. Famine, disease, and displacement became common, as entire communities were uprooted or destroyed. The war's religious roots became intertwined with the politics of power, and its escalation revealed the fragility of peace in a divided world. As we move to the next chapter, consider the human cost of these divisions, the lives touched by a conflict that seemed endless, yet always teetered on the edge of resolution. By the late 1620s, the Protestant cause seemed to falter, their forces weakened by defeats and dwindling alliances. But the entry of Sweden into the war, under the leadership of King Gustavus Adolphus, marked a turning point that would reshape the conflict. Gustavus Adolphus was not just a ruler, he was a visionary military leader whose innovations in strategy and tactics would leave a lasting legacy on warfare. Gustavus Adolphus believed deeply in the Protestant cause, but his intervention was also driven by Sweden's strategic interests. The Habsburgs' growing influence threatened Swedish dominance in the Baltic region, making the 30 Years' War a matter of survival and sovereignty for his nation. With the backing of France, which sought to undermine Habsburg power despite being Catholic, Sweden entered the fray in 1630, bringing with it a disciplined and modernised army. The Swedish forces brought a new energy to the Protestant struggle. Gustavus Adolphus introduced revolutionary military tactics, emphasizing mobility, coordination, and the use of combined arms, integrating infantry, cavalry and artillery into a cohesive fighting force. These methods gave his troops a significant edge over the larger but less organized armies of the Catholic League. The Battle of Breitenfeld in 1631 was a defining moment, a stunning victory for the Swedes and their Protestant allies. Gustavus Adolphus's army decimated the Catholic forces, demonstrating the effectiveness of his strategies. This victory not only bolstered Protestant morale, but also drew new allies to their cause, shifting the balance of power in the war. Under Gustavus Adolphus's leadership, the Protestant forces began to reclaim territory lost in earlier phases of the war. They advanced deep into the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, challenging Ferdinand II's dominance and threatening the stability of the Habsburg realms. Gustavus Adolphus's charisma and tactical brilliance earned him the loyalty of his troops and the respect of his enemies. But his triumphs were not without cost. In 1632, at the Battle of Lutzen, Gustavus Adolphus achieved another critical victory, but lost his life in the process. His death was a severe blow to the Protestant cause, yet his legacy endured. The momentum he had generated allowed Sweden to remain a dominant force in the war. and his military innovations continued to influence the strategies of both sides. As Sweden's intervention reshaped the war, the conflict grew even more complex. Religious divides began to blur as political ambitions took centre stage, with Catholic France supporting Protestant Sweden to counterbalance Habsburg power. This shifting landscape of alliances revealed the deeper currents driving the war, a struggle not just of faith, but of power and control over Europe's future. Gustavus Adolphus's role in the 30 Years' War is a testament to the transformative power of leadership and innovation. His contributions brought hope to a fractured alliance and altered the course of a seemingly endless conflict. Yet, his death also reminded the world of the fleeting nature of triumph in the face of war's relentless toll. As we prepare to move to the next chapter, take a moment to reflect on the determination and vision it takes to bring change amid chaos. In the darkest times, even a single leader can leave an indelible mark, and yet the storm of history moves forward, carrying all in its wake. As the 30 Years' War stretched into its second decade, the conflict expanded beyond its original boundaries, engulfing nearly all of Europe in its relentless grasp. Nations that had once remained on the sidelines found themselves drawn into the fray, whether by alliances, ambitions, or the sheer inevitability of the war's momentum. The entry of France in 1635 marked a dramatic shift. Though a Catholic nation, France allied with Protestant powers like Sweden to counterbalance the Habsburgs' influence. This decision underscored how the war had evolved from a religious conflict into a broader struggle for political dominance in Europe. The stage was set for what would become one of the most destructive periods of the war. As alliances grew ever more complex and battles became increasingly brutal. Across the continent, the toll of the war was staggering. Cities were besieged and burned. Fields were left barren and lifeless, and villages were emptied as civilians fled the advancing armies. Mercenary forces, often poorly paid and motivated by survival, resorted to pillaging and looting, leaving devastation in their wake. Famine and disease swept through war-torn regions, taking more lives than the battles themselves. As you listen to this story, let the gravity of these events drift gently through your thoughts, but not linger. Imagine the chaos of the time slowly fading into the background, replaced by a sense of quiet reflection. Feel the weight of the war's hardship giving way to an understanding of resilience, a reminder of humanity's enduring strength even in its darkest hours. The conflict's scope seemed endless, with battles erupting in regions as far-reaching as the Rhineland, the Netherlands, and northern Italy. Yet amid the turmoil, moments of diplomacy and negotiation emerged, offering brief glimpses of hope. Peace talks began to take shape, though they were slow and fraught with challenges, reflecting the deep divisions and mistrust among the warring parties. Let these moments of negotiation remind you that even in the midst of chaos, there are always efforts toward resolution. Allow yourself to relax further, your breath steady and calm, as if tracing the contours of history's slow march toward peace. As we move deeper into the story, the resilience of the people and the shifting tides of war remind us of the impermanence of struggle. Take this moment to let your mind ease. Let the complexity of the 30 Years' War unravel gently, leaving you with a sense of quiet perspective and peace. After nearly 3 decades of relentless conflict, Europe began to seek an end to the devastation. The 30 Years' War had taken a toll unlike any before it. Economies were ruined, lands were ravaged, and millions of lives had been lost. By the early 1640s, the warring nations realized that no decisive victory was in sight. The war had devolved into a stalemate of exhaustion. Thus began the long and complex journey toward peace, through the negotiations that would culminate in the Peace of Westphalia. The Westphalian negotiations were unprecedented in their scope and ambition. For the first time in European history, nearly all major powers gathered to discuss terms of peace. Delegates from Catholic and Protestant states, as well as representatives from France, Sweden, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, met in the towns of Münster and Osnabrück. These talks would last for years, reflecting the complexity of the issues at hand and the deep mistrust between the parties. As the negotiations unfolded, the participants wrestled with questions of religion, sovereignty, and the balance of power. The Peace of Westphalia sought to establish a new order in Europe, one that would recognise the religious and political realities that had emerged from the war. Protestant and Catholic states agreed to a form of mutual tolerance, reaffirming the principle that rulers could determine their state's religion, while also granting greater freedoms to minority faiths. The treaty also redefined the concept of sovereignty. It marked the beginning of the modern state system, where nations recognised each other's territorial boundaries and agreed not to interfere in one another's internal affairs. This idea of state sovereignty would become a cornerstone of international relations for centuries to come. While the Peace of Westphalia brought an end to the 30 Years' War, its provisions were not without compromise. No side emerged as a clear victor, and many of the underlying tensions remained unresolved. Yet, the treaty succeeded in ending the immediate bloodshed and creating a framework for coexistence in a fractured Europe. As you listen to the conclusion of this chapter, let the idea of resolution fill your thoughts. Picture the weary negotiators coming together after years of strife, finding common ground in the hope of a better future. Let this image remind you that even in the most challenging times, peace is always within reach. The road to peace was long and arduous, yet it proved that dialogue and compromise can overcome even the deepest divisions. Allow this lesson to settle within you as you relax further, your mind at ease, as the echoes of war fade into the calm promise of resolution. As the Peace of Westphalia brought an end to the 30 Years' War, Europe began to rebuild from the ashes of its most devastating conflict. The war left an indelible mark on the continent, shaping the course of history in profound ways. Nations that had been battered and broken emerged with new identities, while the concept of sovereignty laid the foundation for the modern nation-state system. The war's legacy extended beyond politics and borders. It changed the way conflicts were waged, highlighting the immense cost of prolonged war and the devastating impact on civilian populations. The lessons of the 30 Years' War echoed across generations, reminding humanity of the importance of diplomacy, tolerance, and restraint. This story of destruction and eventual reconciliation carries a timeless message. Even in the darkest of times, there is always a path forward. A path forged through perseverance, negotiation, and the willingness to find common ground. The 30 Years' War may have scarred Europe, but it also served as a turning point, proving that peace, though hard won, is always worth striving for. As we close this chapter of history, take a moment to reflect on the resilience of the human spirit. Let the story of the 30 Years' War remind you of the strength found in unity and the power of resolution. Think of the nations and individuals who rebuilt after so much loss, their journey, though difficult, leading to a more stable and interconnected future. Now let the soothing sounds of rain guide you to a place of peace and relaxation. Imagine gentle raindrops falling softly on leaves, washing away the echoes of history's struggles. Feel the rhythm of the rain bringing calm to your mind and a sense of quiet to your soul. The story of Omaha Beach begins with the broader context of World War II, a conflict that had engulfed the globe by the early 1940s. After the fall of France to Nazi Germany in 1940, much of Western Europe lay under German occupation. Britain stood alone as the last bastion of resistance in Western Europe, facing the might of the German Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain and enduring relentless bombing during the Blitz. Despite these challenges, Britain, under the leadership of Winston Churchill, refused to capitulate. Across the Atlantic, the United States had initially maintained a policy of neutrality, focusing on domestic recovery from the Great Depression. However, The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 brought the United States into the war, joining the Allies in their struggle against the Axis powers. The United States, with its vast industrial capacity and manpower, became a crucial partner in the fight to liberate Europe. By 1942, the Allies faced the daunting task of planning a full-scale invasion of Nazi-occupied Europe. This effort, known as Operation Overlord, aimed to establish a foothold in France, opening a Western front to relieve pressure on the Soviet Union, which was bearing the brunt of the fighting on the Eastern Front. The operation would require meticulous planning, vast resources, and extraordinary bravery. The invasion was scheduled for June 1944 and would take place along a 50-mile stretch of coastline in Normandy, France. The beaches were divided into 5 sectors: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. Each sector had its own challenges, but Omaha Beach, assigned to American forces, was considered one of the most heavily defended and treacherous. The Germans, anticipating an Allied invasion, had fortified the French coastline with a series of defensive structures known as the Atlantic Wall. This formidable barrier included concrete bunkers, artillery emplacements, barbed wire, minefields, and anti-tank obstacles. Omaha Beach, with its high bluffs overlooking the shoreline, offered a natural defensive advantage to the German forces. The beach was defended by the 352nd Infantry Division, a well-trained and battle-hardened unit. The Allies knew that success at Omaha Beach would be crucial to the overall success of Operation Overlord. The beach provided a direct route inland to key roads and towns, making it essential for securing the Normandy region. Failure to take Omaha Beach could jeopardize the entire invasion and prolong the war. On the night of June 5, 1944, a massive Allied armada gathered off the coast of Normandy. Over 5,000 ships carrying troops, vehicles and supplies prepared to launch the largest amphibious invasion in history. The force included American, British, Canadian and other Allied troops, all united in their mission to liberate Europe from Nazi tyranny. As dawn broke on June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, the invasion began. The assault on Omaha Beach involved 2 American divisions, the 1st Infantry Division, known as the Big Red One, and the 29th Infantry Division. These soldiers, many of them young and inexperienced, faced a harrowing task. The first waves of troops landed at Omaha Beach under intense enemy fire. The Germans, positioned in fortified bunkers and machine gun nests, rained bullets and artillery shells on the landing craft and soldiers. Many of the landing craft were destroyed before they reached the shore, and those who made it to the beach faced a deadly gauntlet of obstacles and firepower. The terrain at Omaha Beach added to the challenges. The wide open beach provided little cover, and the high bluffs allowed German forces to fire down on the exposed American troops. The rising tide threatened to engulf the soldiers and their equipment, adding another layer of urgency to the battle. Despite these overwhelming odds, the American soldiers displayed extraordinary bravery and determination. Small groups of men began to push forward, finding gaps in the German defences and scaling the bluffs. Engineers worked tirelessly to clear obstacles and minefields, enabling reinforcements to reach the beach. By mid-morning, the tide of the battle began to turn. Reinforcements from subsequent waves brought additional manpower and firepower to the fight. Naval bombardments and airstrikes targeted German positions, weakening their defences. Slowly but steadily, the Americans gained ground, overcoming the formidable obstacles and breaking through the Atlantic Wall. By the end of the day, the American forces had secured a foothold at Omaha Beach, but the cost was staggering. Over 2,000 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing, making Omaha Beach the bloodiest of the 5 D-Day beaches. The sacrifices of these men were not in vain, as their efforts paved the way for the liberation of Normandy and, ultimately, the defeat of Nazi Germany. The success at Omaha Beach and the broader D-Day invasion marked a turning point in World War II. the Allies established a strong presence in Normandy, which allowed them to launch further offensives into France and beyond. Within weeks, Paris was liberated, and the momentum of the war shifted decisively in favour of the Allies. The Battle of Omaha Beach is remembered as a testament to the courage and resilience of those who fought and sacrificed for freedom. The stories of individual heroism and collective determination continue to inspire generations, reminding us of the cost of war and the enduring value of liberty. Today, the beaches of Normandy are peaceful, their sands washed clean by the tides of time. Memorials and cemeteries stand as solemn reminders of the events of June 6, 1944, honouring the men who gave their lives in the name of freedom. The legacy of Omaha Beach lives on, a symbol of unity, sacrifice, and the indomitable human spirit. As you reflect on this story, imagine the quiet shores of Normandy under a starlit sky, the waves gently lapping at the sands that once bore witness to such bravery. Let the memory of those who fought and fell remind you of the strength and resilience within us all. As the day of June 6, 1944, unfolded at Omaha Beach, the battle continued with relentless intensity. The early waves of American troops had endured devastating losses. Many soldiers never even made it off their landing craft, while others were cut down as they stepped onto the beach. The chaos and carnage of those first hours were overwhelming, with confusion reigning among the survivors as they sought to find cover and organize. The German defenders, positioned in fortified bunkers and pillboxes, maintained a near-constant stream of fire. Machine guns swept the open sands, mortars exploded among the soldiers, and artillery from the high bluffs pounded the beachhead. These fortifications had been meticulously planned, with interlocking fields of fire and overlapping lines of defence, making it nearly impossible for large groups of soldiers to advance without suffering heavy casualties. The Americans faced logistical challenges as well. Many of the tanks and heavy equipment intended to support the landing were lost at sea due to rough waters and enemy fire. The soldiers were left with little more than their rifles, grenades, and sheer determination to overcome the formidable obstacles ahead. The landing beach itself was littered with debris, destroyed landing craft, abandoned equipment, and the bodies of fallen comrades, creating a scene of utter devastation. Yet, amidst this chaos, small pockets of resistance began to form. Groups of soldiers, often led by junior officers or non-commissioned officers, rallied together and started pushing forward. These men displayed extraordinary courage, braving machine gun fire and mortar shells to advance toward the German positions. Engineers worked tirelessly to clear paths through the beach obstacles, blowing gaps in the barbed wire and clearing mines under heavy fire. One of the pivotal moments of the battle came when soldiers began scaling the bluffs that loomed over the beach. Using ropes, ladders, and sheer grit, they climbed the steep slopes to reach the German positions at the top. The fighting here was brutal and close quarters, with soldiers engaging the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. Slowly but surely, the Americans began to neutralize the German bunkers and gun emplacements, thus weakening the enemy's defensive hold on the beach. The turning point at Omaha Beach was also aided by naval support. Realizing the dire situation on the beach, American naval commanders ordered their ships to move closer to shore, despite the risk of running aground. From these positions, the ships unleashed a barrage of firepower, targeting the German fortifications with their heavy guns. These naval bombardments played a crucial role in suppressing the enemy defences, allowing the soldiers on the ground to advance. By the afternoon, the tide of the battle had shifted. Reinforcements from later waves brought fresh troops and supplies to the beach, bolstering the American effort. The German defenders, though still fighting fiercely, began to falter under the relentless pressure. The combination of infantry assaults, naval bombardments, and air support gradually broke the German lines. By nightfall, the Americans had established a tenuous foothold at Omaha Beach. The high bluffs, once a symbol of the German dominance, were now under American control. From this vantage point, the troops could push inland, linking up with forces from the other landing beaches and beginning the liberation of Normandy. The cost of victory at Omaha Beach was staggering. Over 2,000 American soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing, making it one of the bloodiest battles of D-Day. The courage and sacrifice of these men, however, paved the way for the success of the entire invasion. Their actions ensured that the Allies could establish a strong presence in Normandy, a crucial step toward defeating Nazi Germany. In the days that followed, the Americans worked to consolidate their position at Omaha Beach. Supply lines were established, reinforcements poured in, and the beachhead became a staging ground for further operations. The success of D-Day marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, as Allied forces pushed inland and liberated towns and cities across France. The Battle of Omaha Beach remains one of the most iconic and studied engagements of World War II. It exemplifies the extraordinary bravery, determination, and resilience of the soldiers who fought there. Their sacrifices remind us of the cost of freedom and the enduring power of unity in the face of adversity. Today, Omaha Beach is a place of reflection and remembrance. The sands that once bore witness to such intense combat are now quiet, visited by people from around the world who come to pay their respects. The Normandy American Cemetery, overlooking the beach, stands as a solemn tribute to the thousands of soldiers who gave their lives on D-Day. As you think about the events of Omaha Beach, imagine the courage it took for those soldiers to face such overwhelming odds. Picture the determination of the men scaling the bluffs, the resolve of the engineers clearing obstacles, and the bravery of the naval crews providing support. Let their sacrifices fill you with a sense of gratitude and inspiration. The story of Omaha Beach is not just one of extraordinary bravery and resilience. It is also a tale of lessons learned and strategies developed that would influence the remainder of World War II. The success of D-Day, including the hard-fought victory at Omaha Beach, gave the Allies a critical foothold in Western Europe, but it also came with a significant cost, offering lessons in leadership, logistics, and the nature of modern warfare. In the days and weeks following June 6, 1944, the Allies worked tirelessly to solidify their positions in Normandy. Omaha Beach, alongside the other 4 landing beaches, became a vital supply hub for the Allied forces. Engineers constructed artificial harbours, known as mulberry harbours, to facilitate the unloading of troops, vehicles and supplies. These floating piers were a marvel of engineering and a testament to the ingenuity and determination of the Allied effort. With the beachhead secured, the Allies pushed inland, encountering fierce resistance from German forces. The bocage, the dense hedgerows that characterised the Normandy countryside, proved to be a significant obstacle, offering German defenders natural cover and making it difficult for Allied tanks and infantry to advance. Despite these challenges, the Allies pressed forward, liberating towns and villages one by one. Omaha Beach's role in the larger Normandy campaign cannot be overstated. It served as a crucial link between the various sectors of the invasion, allowing the Allies to coordinate their movements and reinforce their lines. The capture of Omaha Beach also enabled the Allies to connect with the airborne divisions that had landed further inland, creating a unified front that could push the Germans back. The success of the Normandy campaign eventually led to the liberation of Paris in August 1944. The victory at Omaha Beach and the other landing sites had set the stage for this momentous achievement, giving the Allies the momentum they needed to continue their advance across France and into Germany. By opening a western front, the Allies forced the Germans to fight on multiple fronts, stretching their resources and hastening the collapse of the Nazi regime. For the soldiers who fought at Omaha Beach, the experience left an indelible mark. Many of the survivors carried the memories of that harrowing day for the rest of their lives. Their stories, filled with moments of terror, heroism, and camaraderie, provide invaluable insights into the human cost of war. These first-hand accounts have been passed down through generations, ensuring that the sacrifices made on that stretch of sand are never forgotten. The legacy of Omaha Beach extends beyond the battlefield. It serves as a reminder of the importance of unity and collaboration in overcoming seemingly insurmountable challenges. The D-Day invasion was a joint effort involving not just American forces but also British, Canadian and other Allied troops. Their collective determination and shared purpose exemplify the power of working together for a common goal. In the years following World War II, Omaha Beach became a symbol of remembrance and reconciliation. Memorials and cemeteries were established to honour the fallen, and annual commemorations bring together veterans, their families, and people from around the world to reflect on the events of June 6, 1944. The beach itself, now peaceful and serene, offers a stark contrast to the chaos and violence of that day, serving as a poignant reminder of the sacrifices made for freedom. The Battle of Omaha Beach also holds important lessons for future generations. It underscores the importance of preparation, adaptability, and resolve in the face of adversity. The soldiers who fought there demonstrated extraordinary courage, refusing to give up despite overwhelming odds. Their example inspires us to persevere through challenges and to value the freedoms and opportunities that others have fought to secure. As you reflect on the story of Omaha Beach, imagine the waves gently lapping against the shore, the sands now quiet and still. Think of the soldiers who stepped onto that beach, knowing the dangers that awaited them, yet pressing forward with unwavering determination. Let their bravery and sacrifice remind you of the strength and resilience within us all. The legacy of Omaha Beach continues to resonate far beyond the shores of Normandy. It stands as a testament to the bravery and sacrifice of those who fought, and as a reminder of the profound impact of collective action in the pursuit of freedom. While the battle itself ended on June 6, 1944, its implications echoed throughout the remainder of the war and the decades that followed. In the immediate aftermath of the D-Day invasion, the Allies faced the monumental task of consolidating their gains and pushing further into German-occupied territory. The soldiers at Omaha Beach were soon joined by reinforcements, swelling the ranks and ensuring that the beachhead could serve as a staging ground for subsequent offensives. Supplies poured in through makeshift ports and logistical hubs, enabling the Allied forces to maintain their momentum. The capture of Omaha Beach, alongside the other landing sites, directly contributed to the liberation of Normandy. The fighting that followed was grueling, with both sides suffering heavy losses as they contested every inch of ground. The hedgerows of the bocage proved to be as challenging as the bluffs of Omaha Beach, with their dense vegetation providing ample cover for German defenders. Despite this, the Allies persevered, employing innovative tactics and overwhelming firepower to overcome the obstacles. One of the critical outcomes of the battle was the establishment of a Western Front. This forced Germany to split its resources, fighting the Allies in the west while continuing to battle the Soviet Union in the east. The strain of this two-front war proved too much for the Nazi regime, hastening its eventual collapse. The victory at Omaha Beach also had a profound psychological impact. For the Allied forces, it was a demonstration of their ability to achieve what many had thought impossible. The success of the invasion bolstered morale and provided a sense of hope for a future free from tyranny. For the German forces, it marked the beginning of the end, as the once impregnable Atlantic Wall had been breached, and the tide of the war was turning decisively against them. As the Allies advanced across France, the significance of Omaha Beach became even more apparent. It was not just a battle, but a gateway, an entry point for liberation. Towns and cities that had suffered under German occupation were freed, and the French people began to rebuild their lives. By August 1944, Paris was liberated, a moment that symbolized the triumph of the Allied cause and the resilience of the human spirit. In the broader context of World War II, Omaha Beach serves as a reminder of the high stakes and immense sacrifices involved in the fight against fascism. The lessons learned there informed Allied strategy in subsequent campaigns, from the push into Germany to the eventual victory in Europe in May 1945. The story of Omaha Beach has also left an indelible mark on culture and memory. Films, books and documentaries have brought the events of D-Day to life for new generations, ensuring that the bravery and sacrifices of those who fought are never forgotten. Veterans who survived the battle have shared their stories, offering invaluable insights into the human experience of war. For those who visit Normandy today, Omaha Beach is a place of reflection and reverence. The rows of white crosses at the Normandy American Cemetery stand as a poignant reminder of the lives lost. The monuments and museums tell the story of the battle, preserving its legacy for future generations. Walking along the beach, one can still see remnants of the landing, from scattered artifacts to the rusted remains of bunkers and defences. The impact of Omaha Beach extends beyond the battlefield. It reminds us of the power of unity, the importance of standing up against injustice, and the strength that comes from working together toward a common goal. It also serves as a cautionary tale, urging us to remember the cost of war and the value of peace. As we close this chapter of history, take a moment to reflect on the bravery of those who fought at Omaha Beach. Imagine the waves gently washing over the sands, erasing the scars of battle, but never the memory of what took place there. Let their sacrifices inspire you to cherish the freedoms we enjoy today, and to strive for a future where such sacrifices are no longer necessary. Its roots lie in the escalating tensions between the United States and Japan. In the early 20th century, Japan emerged as a dominant power in East Asia. Through rapid industrialization and military expansion, it asserted its influence. By the 1930s, Japan's imperial ambitions clashed with the interests of Western powers. Among these, the United States sought to maintain its influence in the Pacific. In 1937, Japan's invasion of China began its aggressive campaign for territorial control. This conflict brought atrocities, including the infamous Nanking Massacre. The international community condemned Japan's actions. In response, the United States imposed economic sanctions. Vital resources like oil and steel were cut off. For Japan, these sanctions were crippling. Its military and industrial capabilities were under threat. The Japanese government saw the sanctions as an existential crisis, and so they began to prepare for war. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. This devastating strike crippled the US Pacific Fleet in Hawaii. The goal? Eliminate American naval power in the Pacific. This would give Japan free rein to expand its empire. While the attack dealt a significant blow, it galvanized the United States. Within days, America declared war on Japan. This marked the nation's full entry into World War II. After Pearl Harbor, Japan's military advanced rapidly. Territories like the Philippines, Singapore, and parts of Indonesia fell to their forces. The Japanese seemed unstoppable, dominating the Pacific with unrelenting campaigns. But in May 1942, cracks began to show. The Battle of the Coral Sea became a turning point. This costly engagement marked the first time Japan's expansion was checked. The United States stopped Japan from capturing Port Moresby in New Guinea. This preserved a critical Allied position. Despite this setback, Japan remained confident. Its military leaders, particularly Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, planned a decisive battle. Yamamoto's strategy was ambitious. He aimed to lure the US fleet into a trap by attacking Midway Atoll. Midway was remote but strategically vital. Its proximity to Hawaii made it a key target. If captured, Midway would allow Japan to extend its defensive perimeter. It might even threaten the American mainland. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, the United States had a crucial advantage. American cryptographers, led by Lieutenant Commander Joseph Rochefort, had broken Japan's naval codes. Through intercepted communications, US intelligence uncovered the plan. The attack on Midway, codenamed Operation MI, was no longer a secret. Armed with this knowledge, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz took action. As commander of the US Pacific Fleet, he devised a bold counter-strategy. Rather than falling into Yamamoto's trap, Nimitz planned to ambush the Japanese fleet. In preparation, Nimitz assembled his forces. The US Navy had 3 carriers available: USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown. The Yorktown, damaged during the Battle of the Coral Sea, was a critical piece. Repaired in record time, it returned to action just in time for the fight. These carriers, along with their escorts and aircraft, represented America's best hope. This was their chance to turn the tide in the Pacific. On the morning of June 4th, 1942, the battle began. Japanese aircraft launched waves of attacks on Midway Atoll. Bombs rained down, targeting airstrips and defences. The defenders, though heavily outnumbered, fought valiantly. Anti-aircraft fire and fighter planes took a toll on the attackers, yet Midway suffered significant damage. Even so, the Japanese failed to achieve their primary goal, neutralising Midway's air power. As the Japanese prepared for a second wave, the Americans struck back. Carrier-based aircraft launched a bold counterattack. The first waves of US torpedo bombers faced devastating losses. Their slow, outdated planes were no match for the agile Japanese Zero fighters. Many brave crews were lost, but their sacrifice distracted the Japanese defences. This left the enemy fleet vulnerable. At a critical moment, American dive bombers arrived. They found the Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, completely exposed. The ships were refueling and rearming planes. Their decks were crowded with explosives. The American bombers struck with devastating precision. Direct hits ignited explosions and fires. Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were consumed by flames. This was a catastrophic blow to Japan's naval power. The 4th Japanese carrier, Hiryu, launched a counterstrike. It managed to severely damage the USS Yorktown, but the Americans regrouped quickly. They launched a final attack, sinking Hiryu by the end of the day. All 4 Japanese carriers were destroyed. This marked a turning point, not just in the battle, but in the war itself. The fighting continued for several days. The Japanese attempted to regroup and retreat. By June 7th, it was over. The United States had achieved a decisive victory. Japan's primary carriers were sunk. Their ability to project power in the Pacific was crippled. The loss was catastrophic for Japan. Over 3,000 sailors and airmen were killed. Their fleet suffered irreparable damage. The Battle of Midway marked a turning point. Japan, once seemingly invincible, was now on the defensive. The United States began a bold campaign of island hopping. Strategic locations were captured one by one. Step by step, they pushed closer to Japan. Midway reshaped the nature of naval warfare. The battle proved the central role of aircraft carriers. It signaled the end of the battleship era. Beyond its strategic significance, Midway is remembered for its human cost. The courage of American pilots was extraordinary. They faced overwhelming odds with determination. The resilience of sailors aboard the Yorktown and other ships was inspiring. Their sacrifices showed the strength of the human spirit, even in the face of adversity. Today, Midway Atoll is a wildlife refuge. Its calm waters and quiet shores stand in contrast to the chaos it once endured. This peaceful place is a testament to those sacrifices. It reminds us of the price paid for peace. The story of Midway teaches us many things: the power of strategy, the importance of intelligence, and the unity needed to overcome the greatest challenges. As you rest tonight, reflect on this story. Picture the vast Pacific Ocean. Imagine its waves, now peaceful and still. Think of the bravery of those who fought for a brighter future. Let their sacrifices bring you calm and hope. The impact of Midway did not end with the sinking of Japan's carriers. Its effects echoed across the Pacific and beyond. For Japan, the loss was a strategic disaster. 4 carriers were destroyed: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. These ships were the core of the Imperial Japanese Navy's striking force. Their destruction ended Japan's ability to conduct large-scale offensives. The loss of experienced pilots and aircrew was another blow. Unlike the United States, Japan struggled to replace its forces. Its industrial capacity and training programs were limited. The expertise of the aviators lost at Midway was irreplaceable. This left the Japanese fleet at a growing disadvantage in later battles. For the United States, Midway was a game-changer. Victory allowed the US to shift from defense to offense. The Pacific, once dominated by Japan, began to change. American morale soared. The victory proved Japan's expansion could be halted and reversed. For the first time, the Allies had a clear path forward. The island-hopping strategy followed soon after. Allied forces targeted key Japanese-held islands. They bypassed heavily fortified positions, choosing strategic locations instead. Each island captured brought the Allies closer to Japan's home islands. Japanese supply lines were cut off, isolating their forces. One of the first campaigns to build on Midway's success was the Battle for Guadalcanal, which began in August 1942. This grueling 6-month campaign saw the United States gain its first major foothold in the Pacific. It marked the beginning of Japan's long retreat. The lessons learned at Midway, particularly the importance of air superiority in carrier-based operations, were applied repeatedly in the battles that followed. The psychological impact of Midway was equally profound. For Japan, the defeat shattered the aura of invincibility that had surrounded its navy. The loss of the carriers that had spearheaded the attack on Pearl Harbor was a blow. It was a blow not only to Japan's military capabilities, but also to its national pride. The morale of Japanese troops and citizens began to waver. The realization set in: victory might not be achievable. For the United States and its allies, Midway was a source of inspiration and determination. The victory demonstrated that careful planning, intelligence, and courage could overcome even the most formidable adversaries. It strengthened the resolve of Allied forces and galvanized the American public, who now saw a path to ultimate victory in the Pacific. The Battle of Midway also highlighted the evolving nature of naval warfare. The era of the battleship, long considered the dominant force in naval strategy, was over. Midway confirmed that aircraft carriers and their air groups were the new kings of the sea. Control of the skies became the determining factor in naval engagements. This shift would influence military doctrine for decades to come. The role of intelligence in the battle cannot be overstated. The work of American codebreakers, who deciphered Japan's naval plans, provided a critical advantage. This allowed the United States to prepare and execute its ambush. This achievement underscored the importance of information and communication in modern warfare. It set the stage for the development of sophisticated intelligence operations in future conflicts. As the war progressed, the impact of Midway became increasingly evident. The Japanese Navy, once a dominant force, found itself unable to mount large-scale operations. Meanwhile, the United States, with its unmatched industrial capacity, continued to build and deploy new carriers, planes, and ships. By 1944, the balance of power in the Pacific had shifted decisively in favor of the Allies. Today, the story of Midway is remembered not just as a battle. It is a testament to the resilience, ingenuity, and bravery of those who fought there. It serves as a reminder of the sacrifices made by the greatest generation, and the lessons of courage, strategy, and unity that shaped the outcome of the war. The site of the battle, Midway Atoll, is now a place of peace and reflection. Designated as a national wildlife refuge, it is home to a rich diversity of marine and bird life. A far cry from the chaos of war that once engulfed its waters, the atoll stands as a symbol of renewal and a tribute to the resilience of nature and humanity alike. As you reflect on the events of the Battle of Midway, imagine the vast, quiet expanse of the Pacific, its waters calm and still under a starry sky. Let the courage and determination of those who fought fill you with a sense of gratitude and inspiration. Their sacrifices remind us of the strength and resilience within each of us and the enduring hope for peace. After the decisive American victory at Midway, the Imperial Japanese Navy found itself in a precarious position. With the loss of 4 carriers, over 300 aircraft and their experienced crews, Japan's ability to project power across the Pacific was irreparably weakened. The battle also exposed critical flaws in Japan's strategic planning and overconfidence. Despite early successes in the war, the Japanese High Command underestimated the United States' industrial capacity, intelligence capabilities, and the sheer determination of its forces. Midway was a psychological blow to Japan. The once dominant Japanese Navy now faced a growing and increasingly confident American fleet. This loss of momentum had a cascading effect on Japanese strategy. Without the naval supremacy they had relied upon, Japan was forced into a defensive posture, scrambling to protect its remaining territories and resources. Meanwhile, the United States capitalized on its victory to push forward with its island-hopping campaign. This strategy involved bypassing heavily fortified Japanese strongholds in favor of capturing strategically significant islands. Each island seized became a stepping stone toward Japan itself, providing bases for air operations, supply lines, and staging areas for future assaults. One of the first major campaigns following Midway was the Battle for Guadalcanal, which began in August 1942. Guadalcanal was a grueling and protracted campaign, lasting 6 months and testing the endurance of both American and Japanese forces. The lessons learned at Midway played a crucial role in this battle, particularly the importance of air superiority and naval coordination. Guadalcanal marked the first significant offensive by Allied forces in the Pacific and further demonstrated Japan's inability to sustain its initial advances. The importance of logistics and industrial capacity, highlighted by Midway, became even more apparent as the war progressed. The United States, with its vast industrial resources, was able to replace ships, aircraft, and personnel at a pace that Japan could not match. For every carrier Japan lost at Midway, the US was building multiple new carriers, along with the planes and crews needed to operate them. This overwhelming production capacity allowed the Allies to maintain pressure on Japan across multiple fronts. The Battle of Midway also influenced the development of naval warfare tactics and technology. The battle demonstrated the importance of aircraft carriers as the centerpiece of naval strategy, relegating battleships to a secondary role. The lessons learned at Midway shaped the way future naval engagements were fought, with an emphasis on air power, intelligence, and mobility. Intelligence gathering, which had played such a pivotal role at Midway, continued to be a critical factor in the Allied war effort. The success of American cryptographers in breaking Japanese codes allowed the US to anticipate and counter Japanese moves throughout the war. This advantage helped secure victories in battles such as the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf, further eroding Japan's ability to wage war. As the war drew closer to Japan's home islands, the effects of Midway became even more pronounced. The loss of carriers and pilots at Midway created a gap in Japan's naval and air capabilities that it could never fully close. By the time of the Battle of the Philippine Sea in 1944, often referred to as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, Japanese pilots were so inexperienced that American forces decimated them with relative ease. This imbalance in skill and resources can be traced back to the setbacks Japan suffered at Midway. The legacy of Midway extends beyond its military and strategic implications. It became a symbol of resilience, ingenuity, and the importance of unity in the face of adversity. For the United States, the victory at Midway represented a turning point in a war that had begun with the devastating losses at Pearl Harbor. It demonstrated that the American spirit, coupled with innovation and strategy, could overcome even the most formidable challenges. The men who fought at Midway left a lasting impact on history. Their courage and sacrifice are remembered not just in the annals of military history, but also in the hearts of those who understand the profound cost of war. Many of the pilots, sailors and officers who served in the battle went on to play key roles in subsequent campaigns, carrying with them the lessons and experiences of Midway. Today, the site of the battle remains a place of quiet reflection. Midway Atoll, now a national wildlife refuge, is home to diverse marine and bird life, a stark contrast to the chaos that once engulfed its waters. The peaceful serenity of the atoll serves as a poignant reminder of the cost of war and the enduring hope for peace. The story of Midway is one of triumph and tragedy, of strategy and sacrifice. It is a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit and the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. As we reflect on this pivotal moment in history, let us remember the bravery of those who fought, the lessons they taught us, and the enduring legacy of their actions. Picture the calm waters of the Pacific, the waves gently lapping against the shores of the atoll. Imagine the bravery of those who took to the skies and seas, their sacrifices shaping the course of history. Let their legacy remind you of the strength and resilience within us all. Thank you for joining us tonight on History and Sleep. May the story of the Battle of Midway bring you reflection, perspective, and a deep sense of gratitude. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with the quiet strength of those who came before us, and the enduring hope for a better world. Sweet dreams, and drift off to sleep with rain.